Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. Yes, that's right. Even though this is a timeless interview, it's kind of timely at the same time when we consider that Valentine's Day is just around the corner. But isn't it quite interesting that we need somebody to put out a holiday out there for us to express to our loved ones how much we're thinking about them, how much we love them, and how much we care? Send out the pseudo flowers, there's the mock dinner, at the end of the night the candle's out, and it feels like another day is just around the corner, and it just passes in that bliss. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is actually rejoining us. We're going to be talking about love and what that actually is, and we're going to talk with her about her book, Calling in the One, 7 Weeks to Attract the Love of Your Life. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a guest lecturer, 15 years of teaching, and she's also a clinical psychologist who's going to talk with us about what authentic love looks like and what it is. And I'd like to welcome to the program Catherine Woodward-Thomas. And Catherine, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Oh, it's great to be with you again, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Now, I know last time we talked, we kind of got a nice overview of what your book was about, but I thought today what we might do is touch on the steps, I believe, what it would take to, I guess, if you were to go through the 7 weeks to attract the love of your life, what that would entail, and that way people can get a better understanding of that true, authentic place of themselves and that expression of what love really is.
I think that's wonderful and relevant also to those listeners who actually are in a relationship. Mm-hmm. And, whether it's the one or someone,
Someone. You're just good while I'm on my way somewhere else.
Well, and some relationships are that for us. We're learning and we're growing, and we kind of know intuitively that this isn't the person we're going to be with for a really long time. But we still want to make all of our relationships fruitful and beautiful and to help them to fulfill on their purpose. Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, I think what's really interesting is, over the course that we've been doing the show, we do it on different aspects of a lifestyle, and I think the two things that really clearly emerge where a person can truly understand themselves happens to be love and money. And when you think of your attitudes, when those two things come up, it's amazing what you discover about yourself.
Yeah, it's so true. Our intimate relationships really are our gym for personal growth, our workout days for personal growth. The days of moving off into the monastery are really past. Mm-hmm. For the most part, if one wanted to become a seeker and a deeper person, and one wanted to grow spiritually, one went into isolation. And that is kind of an old past paradigm now. That's not where we're called. We're called into deeper relationship with each other, mm-hmm. and to start to learn about true care as it's reflected in how we show up in our intimate unions, in our close connections. And often there's a very big gap between who we think we are or who we ideally are, even the ideals that we hold, that we kind of navigate our life with on a large scale, and then how we're actually showing up in our close connections. And so our task is to really effort the closing of the gap. I find that from an evolutionary perspective, many of the ideals that we have are kind of the North Star of what we have to aspire to, but our true work is to be very, very interested in how we are falling short of living our ideals. And all of us are doing it, and none of us should feel ashamed, but we do want to start to cultivate deep interest. Right? How we're impacting other people, other people's perception of do they feel loved. I know, I think I'm giving, and I have this self-image of being a very giving, loving person, but is the other person actually feeling loved by me? Mm-hmm. Right? That kind of exploration, really being interested in what true care looks like in the field of the relationship as we're moving through our lives together.
It seems funny because you're either in one of those perpetual balance modes of either you're being overwhelmed by the gifting and giving of someone else, or you become very complacent about reciprocating that particular action, if you will. So you kind of feel like, what is my responsibility here in this relationship? Should it be a one-on-one or just even with friends and the like? So as you were saying earlier, a lot of times many of us really only think we know who we are versus who we truly are, and that's usually a good place to start if you're going to cultivate, as you say, really deep, meaningful relationships.
Right. Well, what I'm appreciating about what you're saying is that there's a sense of living in the inquiry. Mm-hmm. And I think we're paradigmatically pioneering something new in relationships right now. It's so funny. We're get right into the heart of it. We're not even talking about calling in the one or the calling in the one process. And I'm going to come back to how it relates to the calling in the one process in a minute here. But I think it's really an extraordinary thing to begin to distinguish is that we're really moving out of the paradigm of people coming together simply to form a sense of security and safety and the building of maybe a financial base in which to live life. And what we're drawn to now and what we're really yearning for are to form unions with people that really help us to grow to the next level of our full becoming. That there's a way that we're all really being called to actualize our potentials and start to pursue the greatest possibilities of our lives. And in some way that is directly opposed to the old paradigm, which would oftentimes require us to shut down whole parts of ourselves in order to secure the safety of the relationship. So I think that's the pull that we're kind of the burn that we're all feeling. And it's interesting in the calling in the one process, very often what happens is that it's basically teaching people who have not manifest love, a beloved partner in their life, to how to manifest and to become, by the end of the course, it's a 49-day course, to become absolutely magnetic to that relationship. And so, of course, it works, and people often bring in that relationship, and then they get engaged, and one would think you would be happy, but then I start to get phone calls from people who are kind of like freaked out that now they're going to get married, because on some level they remember their mother's marriage or their grandmother's marriage, or kind of just the old paradigm marriage, like, oh no, my life is going to be limited and smaller, and I won't be able to really, catapult into all of this possibility that I've been feeling about my career and my creativity. And so I've been really helping people to say, well, you get to design a relationship that serves the needs of your soul and your beloved soul. And you don't have to do the old paradigm relationship. You guys need to create a vision, a shared vision for what you're going to create, and we don't have a lot of role models for that. And then once that conversation is had, then people feel freed up and inspired and excited again. So the calling in the one process is a 7-week course, which is really very comprehensive. And on the most basic level, it's really about becoming magnetic to your beloved partner. So it's rather than kind of a numbers game or go out and make it happen. It's a make it welcome, and what's the shift you'd need to be making inside yourself to really draw that to you. We say, we use a metaphor of a needle in a haystack. Finding a needle in a haystack is like this impossible task of sifting through thousands and thousands of pieces of hay to find that one little needle. And the best way to find a needle in a haystack is, of course, to become profoundly magnetic and just stand next to the haystack. So
there you go.
Find you.
I gave the same analogy one time. There was a friend who was really frustrated. She hadn't really been out with anyone and was really wanting someone in her life, and I said, well, you have to become, exactly as you're talking about, magnetic, and it's something that is a natural process. And she was kind of confused. Well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, do you ever notice that you'll see two like trees side by side? One of them is full of birds and the other one isn't. What's the difference? Mm-hmm. And she got it. She was like, oh, that's what you mean. And I said, yeah. But that's the mystery that you have to unfold.
Right, and that's really very, very specific in the calling in the one process. And the most clear visual I can give you about that is because we all know this phenomenon of, you're at maybe a public event or a party or something, and somebody walks through the room, and they don't really trust people. They have a belief that life is kind of out to get them, that other people have manipulative intent or selfish intent. And so the way they walk into the room is guarded, defended, and there's almost like a way that they're radiating a certain energy that pushes people away, right? You haven't even talked to them. And you look at them and you can know this in an instant, right? It's just something we know. It's an energetic field that's born from consciousness versus you're at this party and somebody who loves life, loves people, feels like the whole world is there for them, feels a sense of peace within themselves. They're comfortable in their own skin, and they really, truly enjoy people and find people to be deeply good. And they walk in the room, and all of a sudden everybody's like magnetized to that person, right, without even so much as a hello. It's really a way of being that we're inside of. So calling in the one is that transformation of being. What's really going to create the shift? Well, a lot of it's becoming conscious of the beliefs that we're inside of and being able to challenge them and really kind of shift where we're centered and beginning to walk through life inside of this more true perspective of who we really are, of our own value, of what's really possible in our lives. So it's clearing away the past in a very particular way. And because I did it myself, I actually was my own guinea pig and caused a miracle for myself. So I kind of do it from a very, this is my lived experience. So it's very, very accessible. I break it down for people. It's not as hard as you think. It's just that most of us don't know where to look. We're confused about how to actually shift beliefs once we notice that they're there. We feel very victimized. Well, my mother did this and my father did that. And so I just have low self-esteem, and that's just how it is.
Don't you love when people use self-esteem as a scapegoat to not get into the game and try to play?
Right. Yeah, well, and we do, because it really has to do with feeling how victimized we feel by what happened to us in the past. We haven't discovered our own co-creative power to evolve the story forward. Right? So calling in was a lot about evolving the story forward. It's also looking at the consciousness that we have around relationships, kind of this, many of us have an either-or perspective on relationships. So either we are going to create a relationship that's similar to the dynamic in our home as we were growing up, or we're going to be alone. And for many of us, being alone is a vast improvement, right? But calling in the one is, well, what's option C? And it's really starting to get that we actually have the power to evolve the story of our lineage forward, to evolve culture forward, even if we've never seen the kind of relationship that we are really yearning for modeled very much at all in the culture even. We get to start to vision it, start to create it, start to generate it, and how we're showing up and who we're being. And that's also, it's really accessing this co-creative power with the universe to start to design our lives and cause futures that are unprecedented and unpredictable. So inside of this process, though, however, right from the get-go in the course, day one of the course, which states, if you are interested in finding a great love, you must become interested in becoming a great lover. Right? My friend Michael Beckwith says that the fulfillment of the vision, that like the self that actually fulfills on the vision, is not the same self that originally caught the vision. And what that means is that we need to evolve ourselves into being the people we would need to be being in order to both attract in and then sustain the love that we are really yearning for.
So, unlike following the advice of the movie Jerry Maguire, you're not out there seeking for somebody to complete you.
Well, there's a complexity to that because in some way, because we are designed to be interdependent tribal beings, we all complete each other. None of us becomes ourselves in isolation. There is a truth to that.
Okay.
However, what we don't want to do is bring our childhood stories and woundings trying to get the other person to fix that story. And that's really what's motivating most of us into our loving relationships. Right?
Well, I agree with that. I'm reminded back in the 80s when Barbara DeAngelis was putting out her workshops and seminars, and I thought she was so right on when she said that a lot of us that are looking for relationships, we love them for how the person makes us feel. And when you consider that, that kind of is along the same lines that you're talking about, looking for somebody to buy into your childhood story and woundings, and so they make you feel better about all that until they just can't do it anymore.
Well, and that's the point, till they just can't do it anymore, and that's how we end up, creating these same patterns over and over again. Because from a law of attraction perspective, if I have a belief that's really kind of anchored, and beliefs are like anchored in the body. They're not just thoughts in the mind, and many of them are not even conscious. Some of them are pre-verbal. Like we actually had a belief that the world isn't safe before we had language, when we were just babies, let's say, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. So it's actually like this somatic belief, like a knee-jerk reaction or a tension that just occurs, that life is not safe. So then I'm going to look for a partner who creates safety for me, right? And that's my number one criteria. I want to feel safe in this relationship. And so then I find someone who, is a hero and rises to the occasion and has no needs of their own and just, self-abandons to just tend to my need for safety and makes me feel wonderful all the time, and it's seamless, and then I feel like I found the one. I feel like, this is the perfect person for me. I'm just so blessed.
And this was all just the first date, imagine.
Imagine,
my soulmate
right
there, right in front of me.
The Cinderella story is true. There is like a one Prince Charming who's going to come rescue me from my ashes, right, and my poverty. And so what happens, when he starts to, the things start to crack, because, of course, he can't be seamlessly perfect all the time. And, of course, he does have needs of his own. And then, of course, he starts to feel resentful because he's self-martyring and starts being a little passive-aggressive and doing things. And because, it's not been integrated, his needs, when he finally does express them, it expresses like a volcano.
Yeah.
Which is a big trauma and occurs as like a profound lack of safety and violence. And there you have it again. Now you're unsafe. Like all of a sudden, your Prince Charming has become the dragon. And that's how we end up validating over and over, these false beliefs. And when we're motivated to go into relationship to try and fix the false beliefs, all we can ever really do is create situations that end up validating them. So the point is to really start to work with the part of yourself that feels so unsafe and is convinced that the world is unsafe, and start to say, well, from an adult perspective, I can really see that, there's safety and there's lack of safety. And what helps to cultivate safety is if one knows to look left and look right before they cross the street.
Right.
So like healthy assessment, being related to reality, knowing how to ask questions about things that feel a little fuzzy or unclear between you and someone, and how to engage that in a really healthy, productive way. Like these are actually skills and capacities to grow in order to keep ourselves safe, which is then going to create safety in the relationship. And so this is us transforming our own consciousness, right? And then recognizing how we ourselves generate safety in a relationship without putting it all onto someone else's shoulders. And this is how we really start to come into the fruition of what's really possible in human relationships and to grow with each other over time.
For those of you just joining us, we're talking with Catherine Woodward Thomas and her book, Calling in the One, 7 Weeks to Attract the Love of Your Life. Now, it's really interesting because there are a lot of books out there that have a how-to, several steps to doing, this, but it seems to be very repetitious in some ways, and yours really kind of gets to the soul, and it begins to be more of the loving of yourself, understanding and knowing yourself first. And in that capacity, you'll begin to attract probably the right person because you'll see how things kind of line up, if you will. And I'd like to spend the rest of this program here touching on each of the, 7 weeks, if you will, in a way where people can kind of really get a feel and walk away from the program thinking and chewing on it, and of course probably go to your website and buy your book at the same time and attend the course, but to get an idea of what we're really talking about here. So now in the first week you talk about preparing for love. What does that mean exactly?
Well, that's kind of a week where people are getting inside the conversation. So these are just setting up the frameworks, because calling in the one really is a very different approach to finding love than I'd say, most things that are out there. It's very, very unique. And it was the book came out in 2004, so it was kind of a precursor to The Secret. And I'm thrilled that people are really learning now about the law of attraction. And since then, there's been a couple of other books that have come out in the law of attraction. But even then, calling in the one is extremely unique in that it really does go into the soul, and it's a depth conversation. And it's kind of like the image of the dandelion. We're not picking the flowers off the top of the dandelion. We are really, truly showing how to root down. So one of the main frames of calling in the one is that our relationship is a mirror. All of our relationships mirror our relationship to ourselves. There's another premise of the Course which has to do with really waking up to ourselves as the source of our lives, that really our actions, our words, our deeds, how we're showing up, who we're being, what we're thinking, what we're saying, it's literally generating life. And it's to start to become conscious of those things, because really most of us are having this experience that life is just happening to us, and we're asleep to the subtle and very covert ways that life is actually happening through us, right? How it's happening that people keep abandoning me, or why am I keep attracting in unavailable people over and over again? Because it's deeply confusing, these patterns.
Why can't I fix the bad boy?
Why am I even attracted to the bad boy?
Exactly.
Right? So it's like, oh my gosh, another bad boy. Right? He looked different. He was a different, package, but still the same dynamic showed up over and over again. And they're very painful. And so the frameworks of calling in the one really have to do with seeing ourselves as the source. So the whole first week of the Course is really getting us anchored and looking like, even it's engaging this conversation, like what's our motivation for going into love, like we were talking. Is it to try and fix the false beliefs or get something that we're from other people that we're refusing to give to ourselves, right? I want someone else to love me, but I don't really love me, but it's someone else's job. Or are we going into relationship because we are looking to really catapult our own consciousness, our own maturity, to come from a place of fullness, sharing our gifts? Are we really interested in the properties of love? Are we interested in growing our capacity to love? Are we becoming true seekers of the properties of love so that we might embody them and then share them with a beloved? Are we looking for someone who inspires us to get up underneath him and her and really stand with them and what they're up to creating in life? Are we looking for a partner where we're going to stand side by side so we can create something magnificent for the benefit of the world? These are very different motivations for going into love. So we're talking about that, and then we're also doing the kind of some fluff stuff. We don't do a whole lot of fluff stuff in calling in the one, but some fluff stuff about going through your environment and starting to notice your physical environment, and do you actually have space for another person, or are you just kind of cluttered up the yin-yang, with every corner taken up with things that represent the past and the incompletions of your past and the messes of your past, and you have your office and your bedroom, and or do you have a space for lovemaking and communion at a very deep level? And so it's like really challenging people or inviting people to look and make changes. Calling in the one is very, very much about making changes. We don't want to just have insights. We don't want to just understand why we're alone or why we have these terrible patterns over and over again. We want to understand how to shift who we're being and how we're showing up in life in such a way that what gets created is profoundly different, a whole new experience that was even outside of your ability to imagine, right? So that's what we're talking about. So the whole first week is really preparing ourselves, even what we're looking for. A lot of us have these very specific lists. He needs to be very successful and make a six-figure income, and he needs to be very tall, and he needs to have a graduate degree. These lists, and it's like we're ordering a meal. I want the pickle on the side, and hold the dressing, and make sure you put extra lettuce on it, and blah 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 blah. Well, people don't come in those packages, and we're not looking for an ego mate. We are looking for a soul mate.
Right.
Right. We're looking for someone with a very beautiful depth of connection and understanding, and the development of true care between ourselves and another person. And really, when you're looking for the most beautiful relationship, these relationships are always about coming together to bless the world in some way.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talk about completions as you go into the second week of your course, and this is where you evaluate or come to discover those parts of yourself, and you simply try to let them go and try to become not necessarily a new you, but a more complete you.
Right, and so the part of the process, week 2, is called completions, and it's starting to identify those ways that we are walking around carrying the energy of the past with us. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that we have incompletions in our past is the extent that we're really thwarted from manifesting our deepest desires. And I have a true belief, and I've seen this time and time again in my own life and in the thousands of people I have worked with at this point, that the more we complete the past, the more instantaneous manifestation becomes. The more that we're just effortlessly begin to manifest. We start to really feel into our deeper desires and what we want to create, and then we are going about our day, and there, the opportunity is right there. And we were just thinking of it this morning. That's like walking through life in a field of synchronicity, magic, and miracles. And I actually believe that that's our normal state. Mm-hmm. That's actually what's possible for each and every one of us. And where we're stopped, where we're getting mucky and clouded, is we have so many incompletions from our past. The ways that we're still anchored in resentment towards what we didn't get, what someone did to us. No, it's not true. I mean, it's not that it's not true that we didn't get these things or that other people have behaved poorly. I am sure that there are horror stories that our listeners could tell us today about ways that they were treated. So these are not easy things to let go of. But the only point of power is to be able to look at our part in the dynamic, even if it was minuscule, the knowing we skipped over, the way we didn't stand up for our truth, the way that when we spoke the truth and someone else denied it and stepped over it, we allowed them to do that and went into self-doubt, the way that we were navigating a relationship based on fear, right? These are the ways of being that open us up to victimization and that are our part to play, and that's where we need to grow. And we will not be free from that relationship until we take ownership of our part and make an amends to ourselves, that we will, from this moment on, whatever it is, honor my knowing, speak my truth, set those boundaries, stand up for myself. I will never again give my power away like that. And in that moment, then you're free from the relationship, really.
I'm sure of that, because a lot of times people can play a story from something that happened in their past and just beat themselves up for years. And you have to ask yourself one time at least after you're done and you dust off and you realize you've got a big victim written across your chest is, how much longer do you think this is going to serve you, and is it giving you what it is you're looking for or wanting?
Right. I so appreciate that, Daniel, because there's such a huge difference between self-examination to understand ourselves as the source of what happened between ourselves and another person, and beating ourselves up. So self-reflection that's really geared towards growth requires like an unconditional respect for the self. Requires that we know that we're, all of us, every single human being on the planet is here to grow. That many of the things and the patterns we're inside of, they're not just personal to us, they're kind of collective. Many of us are struggling with them. The consciousness of them is collective. We are not bad people, right? We might have bad habits or hurtful habits or destructive habits, but we have to be able to self-reflect without moving into guilt and shame. And the thing about going into guilt and shame is we will literally stop our growth and development, by beating ourselves up, and that's why you're seeing that for years, beating themselves up. It literally stops growth. And we even say in Calling in the One that it's the ego's trick to not have to change.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like you're doing growth work, but it's actually avoiding the growth and development and the maturation that you need to get out of that experience. So
Catherine, as you've been working with people, I wanted to stop you right at that moment because I was curious, as you can see, even being into the coursework by its second week or going on the third week actually, that they're really cleaning and they're becoming self-aware of, I guess, call them the ties that bind them from attracting pretty much anything that they're wanting in life. And what has that looked like for you as you work with people? What sort of transformation do you usually see in the first 2 weeks? Because I would think it would be relatively profound in some cases.
It is very profound, and truthfully, it has to do with where people are. People have different ways of receiving information, and of course, my favorite conversations. I had one woman recently who called me for a private consultation, and we work on the phone. So we actually have students all over the world. It's really fun. The 7-week teleclasses that we do, we get students from all over the world. So right now we're doing a class. We have a student in Israel. We have students in England. We have students in Australia, students in Tokyo, as well as throughout the United States. And we're all together, and we're on the phone, and it's very interactive, and there's live coaching. And so some people are like having deep, profound experiences. And this one woman who booked a 1-hour coaching session with me, her whole entire life completely changed in the 1 hour. And she's been writing me for weeks now, so I actually know that it's real. It's not just like she wrote me once, but she's actually been joining
love coming out of that woman
there.
It
was so exciting and inspiring. It was just beautiful because it really is. It's almost like an Annie Sullivan moment, this teaching. Mm-hmm. Like we're all kind of Helen Keller and we're a little bit in the dark and we so want to learn and we so want to get it. But that moment of discovering like water, oh my gosh, water, and that's what this is. Because we're waking up to our own consciousness. It's like Carl Jung, the great psychologist, once said that that which remains unconscious appears in our lives as fate. Mm-hmm. So we really want to make these things conscious because once we name them, like, oh my gosh, I have an actual sense of self, of being alone, like an identity of being alone. So no matter how much I've been wanting relationship and doing everything I could think of to have a relationship, I'm trying to create it on top of this whole belief that I'm alone, that other people will leave me, that life is deeply lonely. Like I have that in my body. And inside of that, oh my gosh, I see what I do. I'm rarely vulnerable with people. I rarely let people give to me. I want to give to them. I don't receive other people. I isolate. Oh my gosh, I never saw how I was creating this. Right? Mm-hmm. It really is this like waking up. And inside of the waking up, you begin to say, no, honey, it's not like a universal truth, like God made the mountains, God made the sun, and God made you all alone in life. Mm-hmm. Everybody else gets to be related but you. You're the odd one out, That's not it. It's just that you were 3 and your mom was depressed, and so she used to go into the bedroom and isolate while you were like watching television for 6 hours at a time. And you decided, oh, I'm all alone. And you've been generating life from that. But it's not actually a truth of the universe, right? And that challenging the beliefs wakes people up. And so they start to show up differently in life, and they're freed up to start creating something different. And people's whole experience of like the kinds of relationships they're attracting, who they're attracting, even if they are attracting anybody, changes in an instant.
And it really is that way, and you start to get a glimpse into what I would like to consider the soul miraculousness, is the fact that coincidences begin to appear more frequently in your life of desires, for instance. And I've always been under the understanding that we have desires because that is a window into what our soul's purpose is to be here. Have you found that to be sort of a truth?
So much so.
Okay.
And even
I didn't know if I was overstepping my boundary by stating that, but I couldn't because everybody. That what I mean by that is everybody. There's the common desire, for instance, for people who generally are in poverty or whatever the case is, that they want to be rich. And the question is, well, what does that look like for you and what does that do for you? But then it starts to change and everybody has different desires and level of prosperity. It's different for everybody. So the only conclusion I could come up with in even the years that I've been doing radio is that desires are there because they're the windows into which your soul's purpose of being here is all about.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And now you're into actually week 4 of the course and what you're talking about, because I see the process of visioning, which begins week 4, and also in week 4 we talk about your soul's purpose and wanting to get really clear about that, as being able to move into the deeper desires. That's what's going to actually reveal the true vision, because there's a difference between what we want with our mind and what we're wanting with our soul. And they can sometimes be at odds with each other. If you look up the root, the Latin root meaning of the word to want, it actually literally is translated from lack, where the word desire is, the Latin root meaning is to await what the stars will bring. So there's a sense of co-creation with the universe. There's a sense of anticipation, like right on the edge of your seat, like reaching out to the stars. What do the stars want to bring forward through me, as me, in my life? What are we going to create together? And the deeper desires are usually for things like great expressions of unity and harmony and care and deep relatedness, not just with a beloved, but also with a community, a deep sense of belonging, to take our rightful place in the world, right? To find our true meaning and our true purpose, to have relationships that we're gotten at this very, very deep level of our soul, which is going to be, so you start to hear the difference between the list. Well, I want a guy who has a college degree. I want a guy who dresses really nice and is really tall and has a sense of style. And of course, you want to be turned on. So I'm not saying it's not being turned on. So deeper desires, I want to be turned on to life. I want to be inspired. But really what is magnetic is to move into that deeper desire and then to start to really envision what it is to have that partnership in your life as though it's happening right now, right? As though it's happening now. What will it really be? And who are you inside of that? Because that's a very different sense of self than the sense of self that we're walking around with as isolated individuals, maybe people who are single or people who've had a lot of bad relationship experiences in the past. It's literally a different sense of self. And so we encourage people to start generating your sense of self from the future you're committed to creating.
Catherine, it's interesting as what you were just saying. I started envisioning a common thing, and it goes back to what we were talking about desire, and that is that, for instance, the woman thinking, I want the guy with the college degree, the 6-figure income, he has to be tall, he has to be handsome, and all these things. Now, those seem to be a wellspring of desire, but then the question simply becomes, well, when you attract that, as you were saying, and it's standing there right in front of you, what makes you think that they're going to want you?
That's great. I love that. I had one woman, I write about her in the book, who used to come to see me, and she just had this image of this amazing man who was living his destiny and very successful and very engaged in life, and of course very well dressed and very fit and good looking, and but she herself was a little bit of an underachiever. She had all these gifts and talents but she was staying at a job that she hated for years, and she was afraid of taking any kind of risk, and she felt like she wasn't at her best physically, and she wasn't really doing much about that, and so. And she was confused, why all the guys she was attracting in were guys she'd have to settle for, until I finally said to her, well, it's because you're settling yourself for a self. It's not really, you're settling for yourself. So of course you're attracting in men you would settle for, right? And then she kind of got it, and I said, if you have an A-list of who you're wanting to bring in, you can't be living your B list or your C list. You have to be living your A list as well.
Exactly.
You want your A list partner. We have to really, it's like instead of telling ourselves for years now, well, I just haven't met the right person, you want to have the courage to ask yourself, well, in what ways have I not yet been the right person?
Right.
And that's where your attention needs to be.
I think, it's just, again, like I said in the beginning of the program, there are two ways that we can really find out who we are, and that's through love and money. And it's really amazing, well, how is money related? But it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the program. It opens up those aspects of yourself that you weren't even aware of that were buried, and then you begin living through those beliefs that sometimes you're just not aware of, and then you manifest a reality that will support those beliefs until you decide to change them. And that's what the first couple of weeks of your course is understanding that core you, getting in touch, as you said, with who your real soul is, and then starting from there. Now, as we set our course with our vision and our intention and discovering and clarifying what our soul's purpose is, then you go to, would be your fifth week, which is first things first. And this is where I think it's really interesting, because let's say that you were a person, and I know that I've been just as guilty about this. One of the things you talk about is like making commitments. Another way of saying that would be knowing and doing, keeping your word. And that is a very valuable thing.
Well, and the first thing that we're really talking about is keeping your word to yourself. Right? So if you're talking about wanting to create a lifetime partner and attract in that person, that's a very big commitment that you're wanting someone to make to you. And so from a law of attraction perspective, the first place to look, of course, is what is your commitment to yourself? Because ideally what's going to happen is you are so fiercely devoted to your own well-being, to coming into the fullness of self-expression, being deeply committed to doing whatever it takes to really actualize your destiny and to develop your unique gifts and talents to be able to share with the world, to developing your capacity to have rich, beautiful relationships starting with you, having a beautiful, loving, caring connection with yourself rather than self-critical, self-judgmental, self-neglectful. These are the patterns that many of us are inside of and tolerating. And from there, to be able to attract in someone who's going to join you in that commitment.
That's the tricky part.
I need a bigger team. It's such a wonderful project, loving me. I need a bigger team to do it.
Exactly. I just can't get my arms around myself that easily.
Right. And also, and your ability to commit to another person is going to also really, and to be able to stand for that and sustain that is going to be reflected in your ability to commit to yourself. It doesn't really work to commit to someone else if we're chronically self-abandoning. That's not going to be a very strong foundation to really be able to show up powerfully inside of that commitment for someone else.
Well, I think the key, too, within that that you talk about is the art of receiving. Now, there's an interesting area there that people sometimes either they don't know how to do it, or they just don't feel they deserve to receive something, or when they finally do, it's like, what do I do next? Do I give something back? So what is that like here in this particular week?
Yeah, that's this whole case that we make for healthy entitlement throughout the course, because many of us who live for many years single really do have this kind of covert belief that we're not really worthy of receiving love. It could come from kind of the climate in which we had to navigate our way when we were very, very little, a negligent situation where we just weren't really used to it. So you really have to stretch your capacity to be able to receive support, to receive care, to receive gestures of generosity. And for many of us, this is a really uncomfortable thing because it brings up a lot of feelings of vulnerability And it just, there's a lot more power in some way to being in the giver position. It feels like a more controlled position. Mm-hmm. And so, again, calling in the one is so inside of this inquiry of who would I need to be being in order to receive the love that I'm really committed to creating. And for many of us, it's going to be to stretch our capacity to receive and to have healthy entitlement, that it's really appropriate to feel entitled to receiving support and basic level of emotional care and concern and kindness from a partner and a beloved.
Not to mention a good box of chocolates every once in a while.
Yeah, especially for Valentine's Day.
Now, it's really, you can see just, in the first couple of processes here how people go, I could see how this would really transform my life just on that aspect, whether I'm looking for love or not. And, it's really amazing sometimes the profoundness that you have when you finally gain that insight and that personal power. And then you finally realize, as you move on to the 6th week of your course, is a life worth living. What does that look like? Because a lot of times I think people just get to a point, especially as they approach midlife and there's this alleged crisis, that either I haven't done enough or I've done too much. What else is there? But there's always more.
Well, midlife is a great time because it's when we really get to go even deeper into discovering our life purpose and what we really want our lives to be used in service to. And we're kind of freed up, hopefully, or we get freed up from the expectations of our families of origin and whatever they expected us to be. And we've kind of earned the right now to do life the way that we really need to do for profound self-expression. And this particular chapter is all about learning how to generate a life that is filled with meaning and purpose and beauty, and it's about coming into our capacity to create a life that lights us up.
Being the co-creator, if you will.
Yes, because, so many of us we're kind of lulled into this passivity. We really feel like there's some future out there. And all we have to do is just keep living life the same way, and we're going to jump, and that future is just going to kind of come. And when it doesn't come, we get actually confused, and we feel betrayed by life. But what we're sensing is not the future that's fixed. There is no such thing as a fixed future. What we're sensing are the possibilities that are present. Mm-hmm. But we have to co-create those possibilities. Well, how do we co-create? Well, the first thing we do is we prepare ourselves to be the person we would need to be in order to actually receive the fulfillment of all these possibilities. One of my favorite news stories is Tony Robbins actually has something floating on the Internet where he's talking about having had the opportunity to meet Nelson Mandela. And he asked him, how did you survive all those years in prison? And Nelson responded by saying, I did not survive, I prepared. And he said, I did not know if I would ever get out of prison, but if I did get out of prison, I knew that I would be in a position to lead the people. And so I decided to use my time to prepare myself to lead, and I taught myself the white man's language. So he spent his time teaching himself Afrikaans, which is the language he would have needed to speak in order to really have the greatest impact. So that's kind of calling in the one, too. It's like living that proactively, that we really sense the possibilities that are present, and we prepare for those possibilities. We focus on becoming the human beings we would need to be being in order to be ready to receive that. So it's a very active, dynamic process. It's not like I'm waiting for some future to just come and happen to me, right? It's me co-creating with the energies of life. And that's really what Week 6 is about, is waking up to that.
Must be very exciting for people when they get to this point here where they realize, geez, the life and I guess the power, for lack of a better word, has always been there. It's sort of like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. You've been there the whole time. Yeah.
Oh, it's not great. Yes. Yes, but it's kind of confronting, too. And I will tell you that there is a moment that's very common where people go into grief. Oh my gosh, I've wasted all these years. That's just very human.
Now, that's something I'd really like you to touch on because I know I've had those experiences myself. And, it's like, what do you do with that so you can actually come at rest and say, but I'm here now and I'm moving forward?
Well, first of all, you realize that it's not just you, it's the human condition. And if you really wake up and you look at the majority of people in the world, most people are living inside of a trance of the beliefs that were set up in childhood. And we can just look around and see the humanity itself is inside this glass ceiling on our higher potentials and, the higher possibilities of our lives. It's not personal to us. And how blessed we are to even be able to wake up out of the trance and start to generate and come into the fullness of our lives. So it's just to hold the grief and to have it and breathe it in and just say yes. And, I'm given the opportunity, and I'm going to commit from now on, from this moment forward, to do everything I can to be free from the trance of these false beliefs and to wake myself up and to start to become awake and alive to this active creative partnership I have with the greater field of life and the the creative energies of life to actually begin to cause things. I had the privilege recently of meeting with a very well-known, famous spiritual teacher and kind of a personal growth guru, I call him. And I'm going to not tell his name because I don't have his permission to say that he said this, but he was talking about, he's been teaching people for years how to make money and become very, very successful. And he said he was on a meditation retreat, and he started to get really, really present to noticing that the message wanted to change, that the message he was delivering, he was really getting the impression that he was supposed to be moving now in the direction of teaching people how to care more deeply for themselves and for each other, really a message of love. And so we got into this conversation about, well, isn't that beautiful? We've been teaching people how to manifest, and we've been teaching people that we have the power to manifest, that we really have this power to create the futures that were unprecedented. And the question now is, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with that power? And this is really, even the essence of week 6, which is starting to generate not only our own personal lives that are worth living, but a world that's worth living in. We have the power to start to generate and foster love in our own lives and in the world at large. And that's, truthfully, to me, that's the most exciting life to be living right now.
I know that you have a wonderful little, I guess call it a stamp of approval from Marianne Williamson, author of A Return to Love. And I remember one time as I had that book in my hands and I was kind of having a difficult day, and I just randomly flipped to a particular page, and there it was, one of those quotes that she actually said she got from someone else, but as she put it in her book, everybody just went crazy over it, and that was just to simply be the light. So you automatically give others permission to do the same. And that's where I would see this work here on in your book, Calling in the One, is learning how to light that light, getting it lit so it's bright so others can say, I want that for myself too.
Right, isn't that beautiful? This is contagious, right? We
inspire it should
be. Yes. And then week 7, which is all about holding the high watch. It's really about being strong in the face of setbacks, obstacles, delays. It's about really anchoring into the future that you're longing to create and living with a certain integrity, being true to that future. And using whatever happens in life as information for our own growth and development, again, inside of this question, like, who would I need to be being in order to have that future fulfilled? So if you experience a disappointment with someone you're dating, for instance, which can be very difficult, very often disappointment kind of throws us back into the old beliefs, and then we go into the resignation and the old way of being, and people can stop there and quit. And to be able to relate to the disappointment inside of the intention that you have set to realize love, like, okay, well, what is needing to grow? What qualities am I being invited to cultivate? What am I being invited to look at within myself and to grow? And it might be as simple as faith, resilience, resourcefulness, It might be something that you just learned from the situation. I find very often that what happens when people are doing the calling in the one process is they get so clear on themselves as the source of the patterns. They really shift it. They get it. We do a release ceremony about it. What I'm giving up is this, and I'm embracing this, and then so there's this heightened sense of, okay, great. So the next person I meet is going to be completely different. Well, sometimes it happens that the next person you meet is exactly the same. Right? Why is that? Well, because until you actually make a different choice on the actual lived experience of life, it isn't really different. Remember, insight is not the goal. Insight and self-understanding, you want to be able to shift how you're showing up. So it's being able to have the inner strength to tolerate the disappointment of, oh, I can see the signs, and as much as I'm having these feelings of love and I'm feeling attached already, I'm going to not go there. I'm going to say no, because this is not the right situation. This is actually more of the same. So I'm going to make the amends to myself, and I'm going to say no. And so I can just be with the disappointment, and I can anchor into faith, and I know what I just did. Because, a lot of times when we set an intention, the first thing that we do is induce the breakdown of every structure in our lives that's been supporting the old way to show up, right? So this is the work of change. It's really crossing the abyss. It takes a lot of courage. It's one of the reasons we offer the 7-week teleclass, so that we can move together and go through it together. And there's a lot of support. People have a discussion board, and they're on it, and they're going back and forth and sharing about their experiences and what's happening. And so people get a lot of strength from each other. And Calling in the One is written to do in community. And it's really so that we can hold, the high watch with and for each other, and that we don't have to do this all by ourselves.
I'll tell you, it's wonderful to have people like yourself out there that have such marvelous bodies of work to help transformation, especially in a day and age that we certainly can use it. Everybody wants to move toward peace and have this utopian ideal that everything is going to be blissful all the time. And certainly, with the election of Barack Obama, you could see as he was giving the acceptance speech how moving that was in Chicago, and realizing what was happening that he made us all feel this way. And the only thing I can think of is that all of us together were wishing for this, and that we got to see a real reflection of the greatness of ourselves and the potentiality of ourselves. And that's where I think people fear the most, is that they are more powerful than they can imagine. But they just continue to play themselves small, and it doesn't do anybody any good, especially themselves.
Right. Well, we always say at Calling in the One that the biggest game you can think of playing in your life is actually the easiest one to play, because that's where the creative energy of life is. Mm-hmm. And many of us are really playing too small and wanting too little. And so it's really about being able to kind of unleash the true desires of our hearts and souls. But the key is to remember that is going to entail great growth, and to not be afraid, to not shy away from setting an intention to manifest those big dreams, and then being completely willing and surrendered to the process of whatever needs to transform in you, so that you are the person you will need to be in order to live that dream.
Well, Catherine Woodward Thomas, thank you for your very special and much-needed Valentine gift here on the Beyond 50 radio program today. It's been a pleasure to have you. Now, why don't you please give folks your website so they can find out more about getting involved?
It's www.callingintheone.com. O-N-E is spelled out, callingintheone.com. And you can also email us at rosewoodcenter@gmail.com.
Again, Catherine, it's been a pleasure to have you again on the program today. Happy Valentine's Day
to you and
everyone.
Happy Valentine's Day, Daniel. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Again, the book is Calling in the One. Go to callingintheone.com and find out more about this. it's not just simply about attracting love, but also everything else you'd like to see and experience in your life as well, and to help others to do the same. And our guest, Catherine Woodward Thomas. Would like to thank you listeners out there for tuning in today. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit us at our website also at beyond50radio.com and sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in today. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.